Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Ellis Integrated Project meeting. I think we're getting everyone admitted here into the meeting. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and I may have to pause and admit some people as we get going, but I'll try to monitor that and get us kicked off tonight. So first, just want to thank everybody for taking time out of your busy lives and schedules to spend your evening with us. My name is Darcy Wiesman, for those of you that I haven't met, and I'm the Public Affairs Officer here on the Umatilla National Forest, and I'm going to facilitate tonight's workshop. So if you could go to the next slide, Lizzie. I want to go through a few housekeeping items. Oh, I got a couple more folks here, I'll admit. So a few housekeeping items before we get started for how to use Zoom. The first is everyone should be muted, but if you haven't already, I'm going to ask everyone to please check your microphone and mute it when you're not speaking. For those new to Zoom, there is actually a microphone icon at the bottom of the screen, and you can see we have it displayed here up on the presentation, so you can see what it looks like. And if it has a slash through it, you are muted. This is going to help us hear our presenters better and greatly minimize background noise and potential feedback issues. And let's see. Okay. On that note too, just to make sure you can hear the presentation, make sure your speakers on your computer are turned up. I know I've had that issue in the past. You also have the option to turn your camera on if you'd like. We'd love to see you, but that's completely optional. Of course, based on, I know bandwidth can be an issue, and of course your comfort. We will have our cameras on when we're presenting so you can see us better as long as bandwidth allows. We do have some folks with some remote locations. A few other features that'll be handy in tonight's meeting that I just wanted to point out. There's a raise a hand feature, which you can find by clicking on the reactions button on the bottom of your screen. And there's a little example on the screen here for you too. You'll see a raise hand as an option, and that's a great way for you to let us know if you have a question when we get to the question and answer time. And we will actually have a designated question and answer time, which I will get to in a bit when I go over the agenda. So we do want this session to be interactive during the question answer time, and I encourage folks to utilize the chat for sharing ideas or asking questions. And that chat button can be found at the bottom of your screen, the lower center bar. And if you do have a question anytime, you can always put it in the chat, and we will be making sure to read those questions during that question and answer session. So with that, I'm going to test your abilities right out of the gate for using the chat by asking each of you to introduce yourself in the chat box. You can access that again on that lower center bar. And if you could put in there your name and organizational affiliation, if applicable. And that'll just kind of help us see who all is here and who you're connected with.
Go ahead and do it.
So I'm going to pause and give folks a few minutes to do that. I see some coming in the chat. There we go. Now they're starting to come in. I was about to say, I admitted a lot of people. There ought to be names coming in here. Great. Welcome, everyone. While people are finishing up their introductions, I also just want to touch briefly on the objective for tonight's workshop. So our intent is really to provide context and update to you all about the Ellis Project, an overview of the draft alternatives, where to get additional information about the project, and then the next steps in the planning process moving forward. Additionally, this will be an opportunity for you to ask questions about the project to the team members that we have available on our meeting today. So now if you go to the next slide, oh, Lizzie's ahead of me. I should have known. So as you can see on the screen, we have this agenda here for tonight's workshop. Some of you may remember about a year ago, we did a field trip out to look at the project area, and we talked about doing another public meeting at that field trip. And tonight is that opportunity. We're going to go through some introductions of the team that's here with us tonight, and we have some new leadership on the South Zone. So we just want to make sure to allow them to introduce themselves so you can get to know them. And then District Ranger Doug McKay is going to provide a little bit of a leadership welcome. We'll have a presentation about the updates on the Ellis Project, which are going to be presented by the team leader, Lizzie Berkeley. And then we'll share an outline for the path forward from our project environmental coordinator, which is Leslie Taylor. We will have time after that for the questions and answers. We'll provide answers at that time. So if you have any questions, that'll be the time in the evening on the agenda when we'll get to those. We have some of our resource specialists available to answer to the best of their ability. I do just want to point out it's possible we may not be able to answer every question you have. So if you ask something that stumps us, we will make sure to copy it down and follow up with you after the meeting. So we will get you an answer. Just it's possible we may not be able to get up to all those tonight. So I'll touch on the question and answer time again when we get to that point of the agenda. You probably heard the computer voice come on when you joined that said this session is being recorded. So I did just want to make sure to reiterate that and let folks know, and we will attempt to make the recording available after the meeting. So you should be able to watch or share with others that maybe couldn't make it tonight. So with this agenda and our format, we really hope to provide some meaningful updates. We know quite a few folks have been following this project for a while. I do also just want to acknowledge that we are not in a formal comment period. So any comments raised tonight won't be captured as a formal comment in the project record, but Leslie is going to provide information about that process and opportunities to comment later on in the agenda. So with that, thank you in advance for helping ensure this is a smooth meeting with all the fun we always have with technology. And I just wanted to stop and pass the baton over to Lizzie to introduce the team.
Yeah, thank you, Darcy. And I am going to go ahead and share my screen here. Well, actually share my video for now. So as I present today, I just wanted, if I forget to say this, I had some bandwidth problems earlier when Darcy and I were testing this. And so unfortunately, I can't have my camera on when I present. So anyways, I just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of that. And that's a bummer, but that's how it goes in this virtual environment that we live in. So good evening, everybody. I am Lizzie Berkeley. I'm the forest wildlife biologist on the Umatilla. And I am also the Ellis Project leader. And yes, I'm so happy that you guys all took the time tonight to join us. And I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to the other Ellis team members that we have here tonight. And I'm going to start with Leslie.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Leslie Taylor. I'm the South Zone Environmental Coordinator. So I work for both Heppner and North Fork John Day Ranger Districts, and I am the environmental coordinator assigned to this project. And I actually have our silviculturist in here with me. So she's gonna come.
Hi, I'm Diane Shirley. I'm the South Zone silviculturist for the Umatilla National Forest, and I am the silviculturist on the Ellis Project.
Okay, thanks, Diane and Leslie. And I believe they were the only two that I knew were joining us tonight. Is there anybody from the Ellis team that we're missing before we go over to our leadership? Okay, I'm gonna kick it over to Stephanie.
Good evening, I'm Stephanie Curley. I'm the new North Fork John Day District Ranger on the Umatilla National Forest.
Thanks, Stephanie. And then Doug.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Doug McKay. I'm the new district ranger on the Heppner Ranger District. And Stephanie and I are the line officers for the Ellis Project. So with that, I'd like to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your schedule and joining in what is your opportunity to participate in your government. It's one of the things that makes our nation great. It's one of the things that makes us as a people who we are, is our government, our form of government, our laws, the framework of those. So this is your opportunity under the National Environmental Policy Act to comment on what's going on with these reserved public domain, that is the Umatilla National Forest. So we're very interested in hearing what you have to say. We very encouraged, as many people have shown up as have. I know that you all are very interested in what's going on out there. So I look forward to hearing your comments and to working with all of you in the future. I'd like to recognize that we have a member of Senator Merkley's office is with us. And that's Jessica Keys. Would you like to speak briefly, Jessica?
Hey, that is so nice of you. No, I am just listening in because I've heard so many people talk about the Ellis Project, and I just wanted to be a little more up to speed on what y'all are planning. So thanks so much.
Okay, well, it's as you'll see from folks who are more eloquent than I am, it's about 110,000 acre landscape restoration project proposal that's on the North Fork John Day and Heppner Ranger Districts in the Umatilla National Forest. So there's a variety of things that we'll learn about tonight that are proposed. You'll learn about the purpose and needs of the project. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Darcy.
All right, well, thank you, Doug. So before diving into the project overview and update, we wanted to get a sense from everybody about how familiar you are with the Ellis Project. So I'm going to activate a poll that you should see coming up here shortly for folks to fill in and to share with us what your familiarity with the Ellis Project is. So I'll leave this open for a minute while people fill that out. I just have to say, this is like the first time I've been on the back end of a poll, and it's kind of exciting watching the numbers come in. Looks like we have about, 70%. So if you haven't weighed in, now's your chance. And I'll give it a few more seconds here for any last participants in the poll. Okay. All right, now I'm going to share the results here so you all can see it. So looks like we have at least one person who responded and said they were new to the project. And then fairly even in people that are somewhat familiar and have had some level of participation in the past. So yeah, and a couple of experts, so even better. But great, well that was helpful and gave us just an idea of kind of the level of knowledge of the project coming into the meeting tonight. So thank you for participating in that. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton over to Lizzie to share about the Ellis Project.
All right. Well, thank you, Darcy. And that was really cool, having that poll at the beginning, because it kind of gives us an idea of what our audience is. And I'm pretty excited that there's some people across the board here with the Ellis Project. So I can go ahead and go through this, and this could be repeat information for those Ellis experts out there and those of you that have already been really involved with the Ellis projects and reviewed all the materials. So what I'm going to go through today is actually very similar to the products that we have on the Ellis website, on the information packet that we put together, and also the story map that we put together as well. So I will point out a few things that I'm going to go through today later in the presentation that are on those maps, so you can look at it in closer detail if you would like. So Darcy, I just wanted to check in with you. Do you see the presentation slide agenda again?
Yes, it's on the agenda.
Okay. Okay, great. So, and now do you see the project overview slide?
I sure do.
Okay, this is awesome. It's working. Okay, so the Ellis Project is a Umatilla National Forest project, and it spans 2 ranger districts. We have both Doug and Stephanie here. There are district rangers on each of those districts. It also covers it's within 3 different counties. So it's mostly within Morrow County. And I think you guys can see my little arrow here. So this is Morrow County, and then Umatilla County is over here. And then there's a little piece of the project area that dips down into Grant County. It's a fairly large project. It's about 110 acres, 110,000 acres in size. There's about 4,000 acres of private land in holdings within that project area as well. And so those 4,000 acres aren't included in the 110,000 acres that I just mentioned. There are many different habitat types within the Ellis Project area, including dry, cold, and moist upland forests, and shrub steppe, dry and wet meadows, and aspen as well. So we initiated the project in 2018 when it went out for scoping, and we initiated this project with the overall goal to restore the project area to a healthy ecosystem and resilient landscape. The purpose of the Ellis Project is 5-fold, with some connected byproducts and other benefits to the community. And so the first that I'll talk about is increased forest health and vigor. And the other ones below are pretty closely connected with that first one there. So enhance unique plant communities, and I mentioned there's aspen and meadows and shrub steppe habitat types and plant communities within the project area. Improve wildlife habitat, protect values at risk, and public and firefighter safety if a wildfire does occur. And also the forest user experience is important to us too. So enhancing public and traditional land uses through vegetation management and habitat improvement. So I'm going to take you through each of these purpose and need statements tonight and kind of tell you the story of the Ellis Project and why here and why now, why we decided to do this Ellis Project. Okay, so the first purpose statement is back to that improving forest health and vigor. So this purpose of the project is really focused on existing conditions of the forested stands out there. So across the project area, the forest is vulnerable to disturbances. And I'm talking about, we're seeing more insect and disease outbreaks out there that are more intense and bigger and at a greater rate than we've seen in the past. And the area is also vulnerable to those high severity, uncharacteristic wildfire events that we've seen much throughout the West in the past decade with bigger fires and higher severity quite often there. So what we did is we did a historical range of variability analysis during the planning phases of this project. And we found that the stand density for structure and composition are not within the range of variation. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples, and I'm going to start with stand density here. So you can see the range of variation is expressed in the percent of a landscape. So in this case, the Ellis Project area should be within the range, this percent range here that you see in these density classes. So there's low, moderate, and high density classes for each of these different forest types. And when we do the historic range of variability analysis, we look at our current vegetation database and the data that we have, and we look at our existing conditions of what we have out there today. And you can see, I'm going to kind of point out this high density class here. What we have today is much, much higher in all of these forest types than it was historically before wildfire suppression. And these bar graphs that you can see below here is another way of representing the data in this table. So the orange bar is the range of variation that you would see in this low density class. And the blue dot is the existing conditions of what is out there today. So what you can tell by these graphs is that the blue dots, the existing conditions, are outside of this bar. It's out range of variability through all these density classes and in both moist upland forest and the dry upland forest. And the map is just another way of showing you guys where we're at, and kind of gives you an idea of where those high stand density, high dense stands are. And don't get me wrong, we want some high density stands out there for sure, but we would want to see desired future conditions be less pink, more green and yellow out there. Similarly, the structure of forests is also outside of the range of variation. So this table looks probably pretty similar to the last one. So we have the range of variation, again, expressed in the percent of a landscape that would be in each of these structure classes. And because I'm a really visual person, I have to have this, this graphic pretty much every time I see stand initiation, stem exclusion, any of these structure classes, so I can get a visual on what those look like. And so historically, across a big landscape, again, for this case, it's the Ellis Project area, we would have these structure classes fall within these ranges here. And today, the existing conditions that we see out there today, these percentages across the project area do not fall within the historic range of variation that we're seeing. And so back to the bar graph, you can see the blue dot being the existing condition again, and the green bar being the historic range of variation. We're outside of that. And so what we would like to do is try to move closer to these green bars and be within. And so the only one that does come close and is within the top range and top end of the range is the old forest multi-stratum. Okay. And I threw this historic picture in here and a current picture to give you an idea of comparing kind of pre-fire suppression days to today. And so the picture on the top is from 1935, and it's within the Ellis Project area. It's kind of over by Arbuckle Mountain there. And you can see quite a bit of differences in these pictures. So with the 1935 photo, you can see some notable changes in stand density and overall heterogeneity. And what do I mean by heterogeneity? It basically means diverse conditions or diverse in character. And in this case, trees, right? So, in the 1935 picture, you can see this big opening, and in 2019, it's very, very small. And I think you can kind of tell there's some openings over here and maybe over here and back, way back there. So you can see that in 1935, we had, in this particular location anyways, we had quite a bit of diversity in the vegetative conditions compared to what's there today. And so when we're managing for both resilient landscapes and a wide range of wildlife species, having these heterogeneous conditions or diverse vegetative conditions can really achieve both resilience and habitat for wildlife and the ability to have beneficial wildfire on the landscape. So there are several plant communities within the project area, including aspen and wet and dry meadows and shrub steppe. And one of the purpose and needs of this project is to enhance those unique plant communities that we have out there. So through those decades of fire suppression, conifers have been encroaching into many of these important plant communities within the project area and reducing diversity. And in addition to that, many of our wet meadows do not have intact hydrologic function. And so there needs to be some improvement there as well. Another purpose of this project is to improve habitat for wildlife. So generally speaking, habitat is not well distributed or diverse within the project area. And by increasing that heterogeneity, like I mentioned before, it will provide for a suite of wildlife species throughout the project area. So what we like to see is, that diverse vegetative conditions. So the wildlife species that like open areas, an open canopy or thinner canopy, less trees have habitat. Species that like just a single story tree layer have habitat. And then we also want to maintain areas where there's multiple layers and maintain some of those closed canopy areas too for species that like closed canopy. So we want a mix of these conditions for various wildlife species. So that is just general wildlife. And now I kind of want to focus in on elk, because during the development of this project, it was pretty evident from many members of the local community, private landowners that are adjacent to this project area, partner organizations and the tribes and the state agency, that improving elk distribution should be a goal of this project. So the elk forage quality is generally poor to moderate in the Ellis Project area, and security is limited. And what do I mean by security? So security for elk is defined as an area that is at least 250 acres in size and greater than a half mile from an open motorized route. So this is a very black and white definition of security, but it is grounded in science. And we do understand that there are many variables that contribute to how elk use the landscape, but there are more than 30 studies over the last 40 years that have consistently shown that elk avoid roads open to motorized uses on public lands. So within the Ellis Project area, there are about 340 miles of open roads. And by strategically storing some of those roads for future use or placing seasonal restrictions to motorized use, it will provide areas that motorized disturbance is minimized. And then if we couple vegetation management plus road management, it will help encourage elk to use the public lands by improving both forage quality and security in those areas. So elk-like areas where they can have delicious snacks and feel comfortable eating them. So right now we're seeing a lot more elk on the private lands, especially to the north of the project area, where elk have been for the last couple of decades now. They have been using those private lands outside of their traditional winter range. And so they'll go onto those private lands earlier and stay on longer and cause agricultural damage. And some elk never leave the private lands now, and they've become residents. So what I also want to mention is that the roads with proposed motorized use adjustments in this project will continue to be available for forest management activities, wildfire suppression, and provide the public with multiple use opportunities across the project area. There are, I think, the most proposed roads for decommissioning to improve fish habitat and water quality is, I think, just a few miles. I think 13 miles is the most that is proposed. So most of the roads proposed in this project are going to be available for other management activities. So I wanted to dig in a little bit deeper about and provide an example of coupling vegetation management with road management and provide a success story. So this project was called Dry Beaver Lad Canyon Project on the Wallowa-Whitman National Forest just next to us here. And they decided to implement thinning treatments. So these green areas right here, they decided to thin out the trees. So here's a picture of before and after. And they also decided to do some strategic road closures that would be within the same area where they decided to do their thinning treatments. And after they implemented these treatments, most of the radio collared elk that were to the north here on these private lands, they started shifting their use of private lands up on the national forest during the spring, summer, and fall. But before, they were using the private land areas during those months. And usually that's just winter range for them. So they started seeing the shift after the vegetation treatments, coupling them with these strategic road management treatments as well. And they saw a good shift in elk coming back to the national forest. So there are also managing the landscape for elk also has some other benefits as well for many other species, wildlife species. And also if we bring elk back to public lands, it gives more increased opportunities for tribal and public hunters, and also reduces that private land agricultural damage that you see in some places, like in the Gerdane area just north of the Ellis Project area. Okay, so the fourth purpose of the Ellis Project is to protect values at risk and public and firefighter safety when a fire does occur in areas. So because of the existing conditions that I described earlier, the forest is not resilient and is vulnerable to uncharacteristically high severity wildfire, which, as we all know, puts people's lives and infrastructure and other values at risk. Currently, the conditions do not allow for, effective and safe response to wildfire or beneficial wildfire on the landscape. Fire is a natural part of the ecosystem, and the Umatilla National Forest, not only in the Ellis Project, but everywhere on the forest, would like to see a day where the forest conditions are such that if a natural wildfire event occurs, it will be beneficial to the land and the wildlife, and in a manageable way that is not putting people and values at risk. And we are also very interested in enhancing the forest user experience, right? And there's a lot of people that use the forest with a lot of different reasons why they're out there. So we want to provide a variety of opportunities for forest users and also fulfill our treaty obligations to the tribes. We're working closely with the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation to monitor the impacts of the forest management treatments that we're proposing in this project to see how the first foods respond, like huckleberry and some of the other first food plants. So there is also a need to improve and maintain recreational values like the campgrounds that are within the Ellis Project area. We want to protect the campgrounds if a wildfire does occur. And we also want to enhance certain strategic areas on the scenic byway as well to open up some views through those forest thinning activities that we're proposing. And then, of course, we are wanting to support our local communities and provide forest products. Okay, so those are the 5 purpose statements for the Ellis Project. The reason why the Ellis Project exists were those 5 things mostly. And that's a lot of goals to achieve for this project. This project is big in scope and scale, for sure. So with all those goals in this project, a variety of treatments are proposed. So the treatments that we're proposing include thinning trees, so harvest and also thinning, so 7 to 21 inch trees. And then for alternative 5 only, we're gonna, the alternative 5 would be consistent with the new 21 inch amendment that just happened, where we could, in some cases, remove greater than 21 inch trees. Small diameter thinning, so any trees below 9 inches is considered small diameter for this project. Mechanical fields treatments, pile and jackpot burning, landscape or broadcast burning is proposed. Pruning, pruning would occur mostly really close to the values at risk, so within within a quarter mile of those values at risk. Planting of native vegetation, placement of large wood in meadow streams, that would be to improve the hydrologic function of meadow streams, and then seasonal and year-long closures, road closures. Okay, so during the scoping period of this project back in 2018, we received lots and lots and lots of comments from the public, and several key issues came up during that time. So these key issues were used to develop a wide range of action alternatives. And each of those action alternatives meet the purpose and need that I just described earlier to varying degrees and address one or more of the key issues that we heard from the public. So the key issues are just the scope and scale, and this is a very brief summary that I have up here. So the key issues is scope and scale of the project, proposed treatments in old forest structure and moist and cold forest types, whether or not the project will effectively improve elk distribution and habitat, impacts of road closures to recreation and forest management, impacts of the treatments to undeveloped lands, impacts of temporary roads on soils and aquatic resources, and impacts to the scenic byway. Okay, so here is our range of alternatives that you will see in the draft EIS coming up. And the first alternative one is no action. We do nothing. And then we have 4 action alternatives. So alternative 2 is an emphasis on forest health and resilience, improving elk distribution and protecting values at risk and firefighter safety, and providing products to the local communities. So Let me back up just a second. Each of these alternatives has a basic theme to them, and that's what you see here. So the theme of alternative 3 is an emphasis on dry forest treatments and preserving old forest structure. Alternative 4 has an emphasis on fuels and wildlife. So we would be focusing our treatments within 1.5 miles from within a buffer that would be 1.5 miles from the values at risk. So any like Penland Lake cabins or any structure out there, we put a 1.5 mile buffer around those structures, and that's called the ember reduction zone. And we would emphasize treatments within that ember reduction zone and also in elk security areas. So the areas that are existing plus the areas that were created or added to those existing blobs of elk security, those areas we would propose treatment in as well, because like I said before, you want to couple the vegetation management with road management to achieve what we want to achieve with improving elk distribution. And then alternative 5 is very, very, very similar to alternative 2, with the exception of using that 21-inch amendment and being able to remove 21-inch or greater live trees, depending on the conditions and the tree, and being consistent with that amendment. And then there are some additional roads proposed in alternative 5 as well. So the emphasis is on improving forest health and resilience and elk distribution, and then providing forest products to the local communities. So those are our alternatives that will be in the DEIS. And I just want to give you guys a glimpse of the treatment scale and location across the project area with these maps. I know these maps are probably hard for many of you to see, but these maps are on the story map and the information packet that we put together that are both on the Ellis Project website. And the story map, you can actually go in and it's an interactive map, and you can click the layers on and off and compare alternatives. And but tonight, I just wanted to kind of give you a taste of the vegetation management across the project area and comparing the alternatives together. So this is alternative 2 and 5 on the first map, and then 4 and then 3, and I organized them in a way of treatment, really, impact on the landscape there. So the hash mark is thinning between 7 and 21 inches. And then again, the alternative 5 would include taking some greater than 21-inch trees. The blue is small diameter thinning. The orange is hand thinning. And you can see that there's not a lot of proposed chainsaw treatment out there with hand thinning, except for in alternative 3, right around those values at risk, because alternative 3 was that emphasis on dry forest. So most of the treatments are down where it's dry, versus in the northern part of the project area where it is moist and cold forest. But we wanted to make sure we treated at least a little bit around those values at risk. And then the purple is wildlife connectivity, stands that meet the forest plan requirements of wildlife connectivity. And that is part of the east side screens as well. So just a glimpse of comparing the alternatives for veg management. And this is the fire and fuels management. So the orangish color you see is the ember reduction zone. That's that 1.5 mile buffer around the values at risk. And then the crosshatch, I don't know if that's what you call it, but it's a 1/4 mile around the values at risk. And then the big long hash lines, I don't know if these are the right terms or not, is prescribed fire or landscape burning, or broadcast burning is as some people call them. And then the real difference, so those are all the same across all three maps, right? Across all alternatives. We didn't get any comments one way or the other on the landscape burning, so we decided to keep the landscape burning the same across all alternatives. But what is very different is the fuel breaks. So these blue squiggly lines you see are fuel breaks that are along roads, and alternatives 2 and 5 have the most. And then 4, you can see the emphasis is on the northern part of the project area with the fuel breaks, and then alternative 3 has very few fuel breaks. So again, we provided a wide range of options there across alternatives. Okay, a couple more maps for you. So this is the enhanced big game habitat maps that you'll see. There's 2 more on the next slide that you can compare. I couldn't fit all 4 of them up here. So again, alternative 5 has the most road management proposed to improve elk distribution. And what you're seeing is the road network, and the light purple is the existing conditions of elk security. And then the dark purple is what is added to the existing condition of elk security with the proposed road management. And so alternative 5 has the most improvements to elk security. And then you can see there's some differences in alternative 2. And here's 4 and 3. So again, with alternative 4, what we wanted to do was focus on the areas that were identified as being important, especially this one to the north, this big purple blob to the north. This is just south of those private lands in the Gerdane area that I was mentioning before that are experiencing the agricultural damage. And then again, with alternative 3 as well, we wanted to emphasize that important area. So in these alternatives, especially alternative 3, it's very minimal, and they're seasonal closures. Okay. Those are all the maps that I have, but now I have this table for you. Also taking another look at the alternatives, the action alternatives. And I'm not going to go, I want to really save time for questions at the end. So I'm not going to really go through this all that much, because it is also on the story map and that info packet on the Ellis website. But you'll see, again, kind of the theme of each alternative. And then you'll see up here in each column is the key issues that I mentioned before that help develop these action alternatives. So not all the key issues are included here, but the big ones are. And you can kind of just go through this table, maybe on your own from the Ellis webpage, and just kind of look at the differences between alternatives, and you can get a feel for each of those. All right. We're getting close, guys. Thanks for hanging with me. So this is the last slide, and I just really wanted to talk about the overall benefits and desired outcomes of this project. You know, there are a lot of goals we hope to achieve with this project, and the aim is to balance the need to restore ecosystem resilience with serving the needs of our communities and our forest users. And we would really like to set up the landscape to receive beneficial wildfire. Like I said before, wildfire is part of the system, and we want to get it back on the landscape, but in a safe way and manageable way. We want to promote safety of the public and firefighters, and enhance unique plant communities like the aspen and meadows and shrub steppe. We want to provide well-distributed, high-quality wildlife habitat and improve elk distribution, which would, like I mentioned before, have a lot of other benefits as well, and contribute to social, cultural, and economic needs. So lots of things we want to do with this project. And now I'm going to kick it over to Leslie, because she is going to take us through kind of the timeline of where we're at with this project and the next steps. Leslie, are you there?
I'm back. Yeah, I'm trying to get my video back on. So hi, I know some of you joined a little later, so I'll just introduce myself again. My name's Leslie Taylor. I'm the environmental coordinator for the South Zone. So that covers both the Heppner and North Fork John Day Ranger districts. I'm tasked to kind of give you an update on where we are with the timeline and when to expect the release of our draft EIS. With some delay with COVID and some external factors, we are not as early as we'd hoped with the draft of the EIS, but we are planning a release early next year, so hopefully for the new year. With that release, there'll be a comment period that will be open for 45 days, and that's initiated with the publication of the notice of intent, or a notice of intent for the draft EIS. And so that will be initiating the comment period starting for 45 days. If you are part of our mailing list or have already received updates, the comment period, once it's initiated, will be people will be notified through those means of communication via email and hard copy mail letters for folks that already are part of our mailing list. If you aren't part of our mailing list, feel free to reach out to myself, Lizzie, or Darcy, and we'll get you added so that you'll have that information and be ready to comment on the draft EIS. So once we receive your comments, just so you all are aware of how that is utilized for modifying or updating the final EIS, the Ellis team reviews the comments and makes adjustments to make sure our analysis is addressing the issues that you're seeing and making sure we're consistent, because we appreciate all the additional eyes that we get on the documents to make sure that we're being transparent and answering the questions you need in order to make comments or then go into the objection period. So once the team does their review and makes the adjustments, we release a final EIS and draft record of decision. And so the final EIS will also identify any of those adjustments that we've had to make between draft and final, so that the public is aware of how their information was incorporated into the document. And that final EIS helps the line officers, so in this case, Doug and Stephanie, helps them identify a path forward for a draft record of decision. And so with the draft record of decision, when that's released, it will also be published. The objection period will start with the publication in the register, and it will start the objection period, which is 45 days for objection. So that's anybody who has made a comment in any of the formal comment periods. And so I just encourage anyone who has any value to add to our document, or any suggestions or comments or concerns, to make sure you provide those during the official comment periods, because if you do, you will be able to object to the project. And so once we receive those objections within that 45-day time period, the agency, so the Forest Service in this case, has so it's usually 45 days for a response, but usually in Region 6, we've had to extend that response period to additional 30 days. So objection response can be up to 75 days total. Once we go through the objection process, and if we receive objections, those objections get sent to the regional office, and they do an administrative review on our document, on the objections we receive, and they provide us some recommendations on how to modify the draft decision in order to respond and fully address any objections. And those recommendations are sent to, in this case, it'll be Eric Watrud, the forest supervisor of the Umatilla National Forest, and he will help in how to move forward in finalizing the record of decision. So all that takes place. It's a long timeline. So I wanted to give people a little bit of a context as to kind of the process side of things, and where that takes us for timeline. Our goal is to finalize and sign the decision late next fall. So fall of 2022, but depending on how many comments are received and how long the objection resolutions go, it could be a little longer or delayed. So once the decision is signed, we're anticipating the implementation from this document to take about 10 years to complete. So that's kind of the status and the timeline and how the NEPA process functions for this project. Lizzie, if you wanted to go to the next slide. In order to provide you that information, we post everything to the project, or all the documents to the project website. So the DEIS, and the supporting documents. So a lot of the resource reports will be provided onto the public website. So there's a link here. And I just sent the link also to the chat. So if you guys wanted to click directly onto that, you can go to the Ellis Integrated Veg Project. And there you'll find some scoping documents. So you can have a sense of where we started with this project. And then in the supporting tab in that project website, there's some more current information. So our Ellis story map, which there's a link here for it as well. You can access the story map, which has a lot of what Lizzie shared for this presentation in a more interactive format, where you can click on the different maps and see kind of the story, if you will, of how Ellis kind of was developed and morphed. So with that, I'm done with my section of the presentation. And I think we're going to open now for questions.
Yeah, so we are at that time for questions, and hopefully we'll be able to provide you with some answers to go with those questions. So a few ways we can do that. I'm going to be monitoring the chat. So if you put a question in the chat, we can read it and then answer it that way. Additionally, you can use the raise hand function, which again is at the bottom of the screen under reactions, to raise your hand and ask a question verbally. So those are the different ways that you can ask a question, and now is your opportunity. So I'll go ahead and exercise the awkward pause and see if anybody has any questions to get us started. All right, I do see a question in the chat, and the question says, it looks like it was sent directly to me, so I'll read it out loud so everyone knows the question. Lizzie talked about setting up the landscape to receive beneficial wildfire. Given that fire suppression is the primary cause of the restoration need here, that makes sense. If we don't get fire back on the landscape, we'll just be repeating the same mistakes. Can you tell us how you are incorporated using natural ignitions and holistic fire use planning into this project? So Lizzie, is that something that you think you could help with?
Yeah, so the question is how we would want to receive natural wildfire in the project area and manage it in the future, or is it specifically about what treatments we're proposing to help receive beneficial wildfire on the landscape?
It was
It's
my
Rob.
question.
Okay, I was
Yeah,
wondering if
yeah,
that question came from you.
Yeah. Shocking. We should play a game like guess who made the question. That wouldn't have been hard.
I would have gotten that
Yeah.
one right.
No, it's more about because we in so many projects we talk about setting the landscape up for fire, and then there's no plan to actually use fire beyond prescribed fire, which may happen and usually doesn't. So specifically wondering about wildfire use planning that will use natural ignitions in this project.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I wish we had a fuels person on the line here. I know there's like the landscape wildfire strategy that's going on, and we're in the project area, we're tiering to that quite a bit in terms of like setting up those, they call them containers within a project area. So if a wildfire, if a lightning hits in a certain area, and there will be an assessment that happens. And if we have done our treatments in a way where we could say, okay, let's let this fire burn and see where it goes and manage it that way, we can use that. So I know there's a lot on the fire side of things in terms of planning and that landscape, or that, yeah, the landscape wildfire strategy. And I'm curious if, our rangers are pretty new here. I saw Richie was on the line too. If some leadership has some more intel on any conversations at the leadership level, that would be great to in. Otherwise, Rob, we can get an answer for you from our fuels specialist too, who wasn't able to make it today.
Hey, Rob, this is Doug. Thanks for asking that question. Actually, right now, we do always look for opportunities with natural ignitions to let them grow a little bit bigger. There are times a year when that's easier to do, and it all depends on where it is on the landscape. But your question is right on with what we're needing to do right now because of the fuel loading that's out there. So a lot of what's being proposed is to thin out around a little bit heavier around the road. So we will have areas that we can catch fire from and manage the areas broken up into smaller units that we call pods. Another thing is we're looking at thinning lower on the range. So it would be a little more open so that the vegetation won't burn too intensely. There's a variety of things that we're looking at. I don't want to be pre-decisional, but we are constantly looking at that right now. And what Lizzie was talking about is the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy that the agency published in 2016, I think, or 14 it could have been. And it's the overarching goal of the collaborative as well, is to implement that. So if you have questions more specifically, I can pass those along to Kristen Marshall, who wrote the fuels portion of this. And I'd be really happy to have this conversation a little bit more in depth when I could get someone who can answer your question a little bit better.
Thanks so much. Just as a quick follow-up, I think I might just suggest, this is similar to what I've heard in a lot of other projects. And we're so often meeting some of the needs and stakeholder desires by doing the logging to set the landscape up for fire. But then on these specific projects, we're not actually doing the analysis on actual fire use or putting forward a real plan on fire use. It ends up being tiered to these other things that may or may not happen. So anyway, I would just encourage on this project and others to get broader support, especially from the conservation community, to actually do some fire use planning, provide some assurances that the prescribed fire will happen and that there actually is a plan, not just tiered to other plans, but specific to this plan about actual wildfire, natural ignition use. Happy to talk about it down the road. As Darcy or Lizzie kind of joked, it wasn't surprising I asked this question. It's something we kind of bring up a lot. And so would just love to see that incorporated more directly and thoughtfully. So thanks so much.
You're welcome. Please stop by my office anytime. I'd love to talk with you about this.
All right, we have a few more questions in the chat, so I'm just going to go in the order that they're coming in. So this next one asks, what tree species greater than 21 inches would be cut or would not be cut in alternative 5? For example, Western juniper or other species. So I know Lizzie is on, and then if Diane is still there.
Come on, I can answer this.
Great.
So the objective for cutting trees over 21 inches is to improve stand structure, particularly in old forest stands where we have had, from fire suppression over the past 100 years, an ingrowth of rapidly growing late cereal species like grand fir and Douglas fir. And so a lot of those trees that are over 21 inches aren't old trees, they're actually under 150 years in age. And we're mostly concerned about them on dry upland forests where they've overtaken stands that were traditionally ponderosa pine open stands. And so those would be the areas where we would be interested in removing some of those larger trees to reduce stand density, remove ladder fields when some of those larger grand fir and Doug fir have grown up into the canopy of old growth ponderosa pine that we're interested in saving. In terms of Western juniper, we would not be cutting anything that was old, over 150 years old, and had old tree characteristics, which are deep fissures and certain crown characteristics. Those would be the primary situations in which we would remove trees over 21 inches.
Great. Thank you, Diane. I'm going to go to the next question in the chat. So it says, is there any part of this project that will include continuing maintenance of the road system, specifically the minor collector roads, which are not gravel but get a lot of use? These roads have been greatly neglected over the years and contribute to erosion and added stream sediment.
Yeah, I can take that one. So depending on which alternative, of course, but most of those collector type roads will likely be used for the proposed treatments and thinning treatments that we're doing out there. And when that happens, improvements will be made to those roads. And if they're closed roads, they'll be reclosed. So yeah, there should be some maintenance that goes into the roads to do this project and implement the proposed treatments. I hope that answered your question, Mike.
And it looks like we have a follow-up to the 21 inch. So another one for you, Diane. It says, what about targeting over 21 inch tree stands that are overcome with mistletoe and or other diseases?
Yeah, so the situation that I mentioned is not the only situation where we would be removing trees over 21 inches. Certainly if removing those trees are going to substantially improve forest health within a stand, that would be another situation where we would consider removing those larger trees. Also in areas where we have a buildup of, say, bark beetles or a fir engraver outbreak, our area entomologist always recommends that you remove the food source. And so the idea is not to remove all the big trees that we are allowed to remove them, but to remove them where it makes sense to do so and where it will most benefit the stand in terms of stand resiliency, and also particularly in trying to achieve our objective of restoring more old forest single stratum on the forest that is critically low. We only have that particular stand structure between 1% and 3%. So those are going to be the situations where we would most likely cut trees of that size.
Thanks, Diane. There's also a question about wildlife trees. That is what it says. So Carl, if you have any additional context to that, you can go ahead and add that in.
No, I was just responding to the question. Some of these trees are, depending on the context, can be pretty important for the structure for wildlife trees. So you need to just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Carl. So yep, there's going to be some proposed targeted treatments in disease pockets, but we're certainly not gonna get rid of all of the mistletoe out there. So I'm sure there will be some out there for wildlife. And you're right, very important wildlife character there.
Yeah, not worried about you running out of them.
Right.
I heard all trees, wildlife trees, Kevin said. Good point.
All right. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. I haven't seen any hands. So hopefully someone hasn't been sitting there with their hand raised and I'm just not seeing it. So I'll just pause again, and if anyone wants to raise their hand or put a question in the chat, we have some open space. Oh, Rob, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
As ever, being predictable. So yeah, another one, and I think this is my only other question here, is, on a number of projects, we and others, climate groups, other conservation groups have been bringing up carbon questions. And generally the response has been, this is a global problem, and this timber sale or this project makes up 0.01% of the globe, so it's not a big deal. Especially though some of the recent science on large tree logging is really showing the carbon implications, how important the carbon implications are of logging versus proforestation and that sort of thing. I'm wondering if you could talk about the carbon analysis that you guys will be doing. And again, it is kind of coming with the implication that in a request that you would do more than just sort of say, this is a small landscape relative to the problem of climate change. Will you be doing anything? Thank you.
So Rob, you were pretty quick at the end there. So will we be doing anything in terms of the carbon storage, climate change?
Yeah, will you be doing more robust carbon analysis and carbon accounting, both in terms of the trees and then also like the whole process of the logging and other activities than we've seen on other projects?
You know what? I'm going to kick it over to Leslie to see if she has any, like right now, we don't have any extensive analysis, and I don't think we have plans to, but there have been some things coming down from the region and maybe DC that I'm unaware of with this new administration. So Leslie or Cindy, maybe let's stick with Leslie for now. Do you know of anything coming down in terms of that kind of analysis?
Yeah, so we haven't seen any new regional guidance or Washington office guidance on how to incorporate some of that analysis. There has been talk for because of the new administration that there is a more robust interest and definitely more focus there. So I'm not sure if we'll be able to incorporate that into the draft EIS, but there is in some of our resource specialist reports, there are some mention and some acknowledgement of, you know, that as an issue driving some of the resources. So yeah, I think I'm not sure, Cindy's new to the forest, so I'm not sure if she's heard anything from the regional office yet on what those directions are going to be. But yeah, I do think there's going to be a shift to include some additional information that in the previous administration might not have been a focus. Cindy, do you have anything from the regional office, or is that something we can follow up on?
Oh, yes, this is Cindy. I would say that I know that there is a new office that has recently been put in place in the Washington office. And I know the person that is doing a detail up there to do the carbon analysis. So they are just now getting started on this. So I'm sure we will get some guidance coming down the pike in the near future. But as of right now, I don't know that there is a lot of guidance.
Thanks, Cindy and Leslie. You know, I'll also add that Rob, we really don't have the expertise within the forest to do in detail analysis on carbon. I mean, we would be probably having to contract something like that out if we did get guidance coming down to do a more in-depth analysis for carbon. We just do not have the expertise here. So within the forest anyways, maybe the Forest Service does.
All right. So we had a few more questions come through. So the first one says 50% of the roads were closed on the district in the 90s. Some of the proposed closures will be helpful to elk, but with declining dollars and personnel, how will you make these additional road closures effective, particularly seasonal closures?
I will take that one. Hi, Lori. Thanks for making it to the meeting. So yeah, that's a really good question, because that's the hard one out there. And I'm going to say that I think that one of the most important things we can do is reach out to the public and continue to provide information and education and brochures. And Darcy and I have been working quite a bit forest-wide on getting the word out on how to navigate the forest successfully, and that there are open roads and closed roads, and not all of them are marked. And I know that there is increased interest on our forest to do kind of a sign overhaul and maybe get some additional signage out there so we can alert the public and help folks navigate. And I would say another tool that I would love to see happen out there is self-policing. So we talked about that during the field trip last year when we were out at Kelly Prairie. And, you know, it'd be really great one day to have, say it's hunting season and hunters are out there and they're like, hey, did you know this road is closed and it's for this reason? And just having the help from the community and getting the word out is, I think, where the direction that I would really like to go. in terms of declining dollars and personnel, again, I think we're going to have to reach out to partners to help us with this. And we have lots of different partners and organizations that are very, very interested in improving elk distribution and helping us with this very, very thing. Some of them are probably on this meeting tonight. So, so those are some ideas, and I'm not sure if others also have some thoughts there on the team, but oh, and then to the seasonal closures, I think, again, we're going to have to rely on our partner agencies and some different funding resources and writing grants to get gates and signs, etc., to help, you know, with those seasonal closures. And we have to ensure that, you know, we're opening and closing them. So again, we have plenty of partner support with this, that we could probably get help in the future with some of that kind of stuff. Thanks, Lori, for that question. I hope that helped.
All right, and we have another question regarding riparian areas other than meadows, and will there be any riparian treatments?
I can take that one too. Hi, Tracy. Okay, so all of our alternatives are going to be consistent with the Blue Mountain programmatic that we have. So it's a programmatic project design criteria, if you will, that we have with the services to protect riparian areas. And so there's a riparian buffer. I don't recall what that buffer is. Tracy probably remembers. But all the alternatives will be consistent with that, with the exception of alternative 2 and 5. There may be some specific areas where we would want to consult directly with the services on and go into that buffer zone. Like, for example, a lot of our riparian or our aspen stands are within riparian areas. And so it's a possibility that some of those aspen stands that we would want to treat, we would consult with a site specificity on and go into that riparian area to remove conifers and treat that aspen stand. So there's going to be some exceptions, but for the most part, all alternatives will be consistent with that that riparian buffer and that Blue Mountain programmatic that we have with the services to protect listed fish and riparian habitat. And then any of the hydrologic function and riparian habitat and in-stream type channel work that we would want to do in the Ellis Project area, because there is some of that has been identified as a need. We also have a forest-wide aquatic restoration EA NEPA document that's been signed, and a lot of the work that we would want to do in the Ellis Project area could be covered under that NEPA document and would not be covered under the Ellis Project area, but it is analyzed under the cumulative effects section in the Ellis Project.
Okay, and another question we have is, have you selected a preferred alternative?
I can let Doug take this one.
I'll be happy to answer. There's one other person joined the meeting.
Oh, hello, Kitty.
No, real short, no. I'm waiting on everyone's comments. So.
All right, well, thank you, Doug and Deputy Kitty. Any other questions? And I love awkward pauses.
I hate them. So just really quickly, a clarification on the map where you had wildlife corridors, I think they were pink. Those are treated areas, is that correct? Or those aren't like leave areas?
So if I recall, you're talking about the vegetation management maps and it was like a purplish pinkish color and it was wildlife connectivity. Is that what you're talking about, Rob?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that question. So to be consistent with our forest plan as amended, we need to maintain connectivity corridors. And those are the stands that we identified from our vegetation database and GIS. So sometimes we move those when we get on the ground and we realize there's a better stand to meet those requirements. So yeah, so those wildlife connectivity corridors, you can treat in those, but they still need to meet the requirements of wildlife connectivity in that's written in the forest plan as amended in the from the east side screens. So often there's no room to treat. Usually it's either a stay out of those areas or a very light treatment. Thanks for that question. Ooh, I got a thumbs up.
All right. Any other questions? I don't see any hands or any more questions in the chat. I'll give it another minute.
Rob hates awkward silence.
I love awkwardness though, so yeah, got that.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, then we will go ahead and kind of shift toward closing out the meeting. Thank you everyone for the great questions and participation and your time tonight. I hope everyone learned something about the Ellis Project or felt they got some clarity about where we're at with the project and how we're going to be moving forward. So I'm going to pass it to Doug to do our official closeout. And I just want to thank everybody for your time.
I'll just reiterate what Darcy is saying. Thank you very much for your time. I know you're very busy, but I really appreciate you participating in this project and in your government. I want to congratulate everyone on how professional you were tonight. The discourse was very well done. I think that we brought up some key issues that I'm interested in as well. And I hope that we can in the future, as we're doing these fuels treatments, be able to provide this wood, some of the thinner diameter wood, to a mill that's somewhere in the general area that can use it to manufacture cross-laminate building material that's actually sequesters carbon. And so that's kind of a general shout out to where we would like to be in the future when we're doing these treatments, is that we have a benefit for the environment and for the local communities that comes. It's a more fuller benefit that we don't currently have access to. So just throwing that out there. We look forward to hearing from all of you. We will be working on this through the holidays. We will get this out just as soon as we possibly can, because quite honestly, every day that we miss getting this signed is a day that we're not doing these treatments on the ground. And as we all have seen over the last couple of years, we don't have a lot of time left not to get these treatments going. So thank you all for your encouragement, for your engagement, and I look forward to working with all of you in the future.
All right, well, that concludes our meeting tonight. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or can't access the materials in the chat later, and we'll be happy to help get that information to you all. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and end the meeting and just thank you again to everybody for joining us tonight. Have a great evening.